the morning sunrise. In Lions Gate, 'neath the tall fir trees, on your face feel the ocean breeze. Feel the magic that's in the air, in Lions Gate the fair.
Recording has now started.
And that's my cue. So, or are we waiting for Eiríkr? It's not there yet. Greetings and welcome to this special edition of the Lion's Den, broadcasting from the Barony of Lions Gate in the Kingdom of An Tir, also known as Vancouver, Canada, as well as the coastal village of Cess-nam in pre-contact times. We are here as guests on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. Today, we welcome to this panel our guest host, Nayka Eiríkr Skreyja of An Tir, and is enrolled with the confederated tribes of Grand Ronde and of Clackamas and Tumwater band of Clalliwalla. Our panelists today, Ga-ga-gew Kimmy-whan of Avacal and Nehiyaw Cree, Monsiegnor Draven Raith, who I have crossed swords with many times, of An Tir and Woodlands Cree, Edward Vikingsson of Avacal and Nehiyaw Cree, Countess Laurellen de Draven of An Tir and Bitteroot Salish, Moon hides the son of Calontir, who is a previous panelist or previous presenter on Lion's Den already, and also Cherokee. Okay, Teuctli Tenochcacuicatl of Anstiora and Latin America, and Vechnik Tevormir Danilov of An Tir and Eastern Cherokee. Thank you all so much for joining us today. A note to the audience, which Zoe has already talked to you about, please post any questions using the text chat option, as we will be muting everyone but the panelists. Over to you, Eiríkr Skreyja.
L'chaim Nayka hayu masaya tillicum thadwa pi nanich, shawash tillicum pi yaim piwala. So say thank you everyone for coming and listening to a lot of Indigenous folks coming to share their own stories and experiences. And you know, as we get started here, I just want to let people know that we're going to be talking about our own experiences. And so some of these things may come off and be contrary to your own experiences of interacting with Indigenous communities. And some of us may have disagreements about our interpretation of things or even our own experiences. And you should just understand that, like all people, Indian people and Indigenous people across the Americas have very complex concepts of who they are, who's included, who's not, and what representation looks like. So just keep in mind that these are our perspectives and we're trying to share the best we can. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is really like people's forays into the SCA and how we got here. I know for myself, it was by happenstance and a friend asking me if I wanted to go to a reenactment event. Monsiegnor, how was it for you? What your first experience getting invited to an SCA event?
Trying to remember, it was most likely, yeah, it would have been Ramsgard or Kamloops, BC, and most likely would have been either a freeze-off or a winter's end and such. I had attended a number of practices and so was looking very forward to attend an event, and really what got me hooked was fighting for sure, specifically rapier. So yeah, that was my first foray into the SCA, and was pretty hooked ever since. So I had attended a number of practices and I just felt like it was like, you know, fighting for like 3 to 6 months or something like that. And so, yeah, it was great. So thank you.
A quick pull in, huh?
Yep.
So Vormir, did you have a similar experience?
My first event was Ursulmus in AS22. And hardcore book kid, one of the things about being Cherokee, that's an East Coast nation, unless you got removed and then you're Midwest nation. And here I am outside Seattle thinking it's lonely. So me and books, and then me and geeks, and then SCA was a chance to do stuff. And yeah, the first event I went to, they put a stick in my hand and let me marshal. That wouldn't happen now. And so I'm like, all right, awesome, I'm in. So obviously I have light skin privilege, so I was not so much the obvious outsider culturally. And so instead I ended up more the outsider gender-wise as time went on. And I found the SCA to be a shelter for me in many ways, a place where I could explore and find out who I am.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is it
kind of
the need for safe space that created that, or was it the inclusivity of the SCA in your experience at that time?
You know how many years ago that was, right?
Unfortunately, you did date yourself there.
I a little. I think it was the geek solid refugee from rigid stuff, and the very few Cherokee I was around were not exactly up on skiggy, which is our word for a two-spirit. And here I come in intersex with mostly a female body, but a whole lot of cheek fuzz. And a lot of the Native community wasn't sure what to do with me. And in the SCA and in cons, it didn't matter so much.
You know, I know my own community has had its growing pains when it comes to relearning our past and how we had a great deal of different genders and interpretations of who people were and how they interacted with that. Countess, as you've been involved with the SCA, have you found that there's been easy and safe space to include your Indigenous identity and how to bring that into your experience?
Wow, going for the jugular with that question, huh?
Well, you are, I think, outranking all of us, so.
So I very specifically joined the SCA to explore my European heritage. I'm one of the lucky few where my tribe has maintained an archive of history, both oral and written, and has museums, and it's been very important to my tribe to maintain that. So when I want to explore that option, I go home or I call family. Aunties know everything, right?
Mm.
So so the essay was for me a way to explore the white side of my heritage, and I white pass. So as long as I kept my mouth shut, I didn't get a lot of pushback. But inevitably, because my Indigenous identity is really a huge part of who I am, I would talk about being on the reservation or talk about being partially Indigenous. And it was then that I am sure it was well-meaning, or some of it may not have been, but there would be jokes. You know, I got called squaw a couple of times, and was very quick to indicate that that was not a proper way to talk to anybody. I got called Indian princess when I was Princess of Artemisia. I got, you know, because I was fighting very early on in my SCA career. I would get war whoops when I came onto the field. And like I said, this was a jocularity, I am sure, but this is, I think, some of what Indigenous people have to face when coming into the SCA is this joking relationship that people who are not Indigenous have with the culture. And so as long as I kept my mouth shut, it was a pretty safe space. But there's also microaggressions that I heard made against other people. You know, so baked into some of the language of the SCA is racism against Indigenous people, against Black people, against, you know, non-European in persona. So yeah, I guess that doesn't really answer your question so much as it talks about my experiences. I never felt like it was not a safe space because I was always pretty good about advocating for myself, even when I was, you know, in early on. But no, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement in the way that we speak to each other, and speak to others who are people of color. So yeah, I'm not sure that answers your question at all, actually.
No, actually it does perfectly, right? Because this is what we're doing, is sharing our experiences, and that's a beautiful segue. And it kind of makes me want to ask a question is, Edward and Ga-ga-gew, you guys obviously have personas that are very indigenous in their representation. So, knowing what the Countess's experience has been in the past, having some difficulties in people understanding what would be considered appropriate in joking and not, have you had similar experience or something completely different?
Answer. No, we've had a pretty positive experience actually within the SCA, honestly. We've had only probably less than a handful of experiences that were negative. One of them pretty blatant. I mean, the first time that I brought Ga-ga-gew to an event, something as simple as a compliment was turned pretty utterly, thank you for being Indian, and we didn't even know how, she didn't even know how to react, right? So, it was, but typically we've had so much positive influence, up here in the north, in Avacal, that so many people have got behind us and pushed for us to do what we do now. And I've been playing for 23 years now, and almost all of it European until a year and a half ago. And Ga-ga-gew's went straight into First Nations after 6 months, straight into her culture and whatnot. So I think it just came for us. It just came from her just not giving a crap what anybody thought. She didn't care. So, and then the support was obviously extremely helpful. So we haven't had a huge amount of negative experiences per se. But we've had a few. There's obviously been a few of, just uneducated
Missteps.
Yeah, missteps. Yeah.
So I guess using that as kind of the opposite end almost of the spectrum, I mean, I'm kind of curious, Moon, I know that you, because you've had also very indigenous persona, have had some real difficulties with people accepting both the persona and the perception of the historical accuracy of it. What's been your experience with this?
Well, I mean, I came into it a little differently than everybody else, because when I started, I was 15 going on 16. So I'm 30 years in now, AS, way back there. But I guess the difficulty is when I started, it was more mentally for me than people, around me. So, because I was a stick jock, I didn't care about the rest of the stuff. I was there to go out and swing sticks and do a thing I enjoyed. And they're like, "What's my, your persona?" I'm like, "Well, here's what I am." And I'm like, "Well, that's not possible." Okay, cool. We'll just go with that. And slowly, archaeology's kind of been in my favor, but it's been, I have some very dear friends that I will accept, I'll accept jokes from. Let me get you a blanket. Little things like that. But there's other ones that are I don't even know you. What did you just say? But then there's other people that have been, very, very supportive from the very beginning. It's that's cool. Keep doing that. But, for me, it was also, there was some stuff at home of figuring out who in the world I was on top of it all. Because we didn't live on any of the reservations when I was a kid. My dad lived on one when he was younger, but they were also hiding. They literally hid in the deserts of the Southwest for a long time. So it's kind of one of those things of it's, I don't know, I'm in an awkward spot. So
Well,
Not
I don't
quite.
think anyone's spot's going to be completely comfortable, especially this evening, right?
oh,
Well,
But yeah.
thinking about access to information, to help support your persona and the lack of access to that. And I mean, Teuctli, did you have access issues of getting information to help with your persona's development?
So
yeah.
I think that one was addressed to me.
Well,
Qualitonali.
sorry, did I really butchered your name, didn't I?
No, that's actually my title. So you can Notaka Teuctli to Tenochcacuicatl del Mar. That's a fancy way of saying in Nahuatl, I am, you can call me Lord Tenoch for short. So as I do a lot of work in classical Nahuatl, which was the language spoken during the colonial era. This is the language recorded by the Spaniards of the Aztec Empire in the 16th century. And boy, has that been an uphill battle, having to teach myself a language that is not spoken anymore. But I mean, I'm at the point where my name is a constructed name that I was able to make out of the language. I write pieces now and perform in that language. And it was a lot of independent work. When I first joined the SCA, I joined in late 2018. And my partner was the one that introduced it to me. And he kept trying to get me to go for a while. And I'm like, nah, I don't know. That sounds like it could be kind of racist. Like the first thing I thought was like people pretending to be a different race. That sounds questionable. I don't know how I feel about that as a Latino. That's not something that I don't think I'm comfortable with. And I kept having that like hesitation about it. And then he invited me to an arts and science event that just so happened to have a Bardic competition. And I'm like, all right, I'm sold. Bardic, I can do this. But while I was there, everyone is talking about their personas and, that they do persona play and this and that. And they're going on and on about how they've constructed the personas and what they're based off of and their ties to them and their interest in them. And I'm like, okay, cool. So persona is something personal. Well, I'm someone who comes from a mixed heritage background. I mean, both sides of my family are Spanish and indigenous mixed. I mean, that's not everyone in Mexico, but that is a large percent of people in Mexico are mixed between Spanish and indigenous. And there's a lot of opinions about which you should consider yourself. But the point is, I'm a mixed person. And I thought, well, I mean, literally in period, mixed culture is a thing. That is literally a thing that happens in late period. I'm going to do a mixed culture persona. And everyone's like, are you sure you don't want to just do Spanish? And then like maybe do some other stuff on the side. It's kind of hard to do the Aztec stuff. And so that was an uphill battle. It wasn't even looking for the resource because the resources are they're abundant, especially if you speak Spanish like I do. I mean, a lot of governments in Latin America are now doing work where they're focusing on indigenous languages and publishing, codices and records, and there are scholars that work in those languages. But first of all, you have to be Spanish speaking, which not a lot of people in the SCA are, so there's already a language barrier even in mundane languages. And then now you have somebody who is brand new, myself, and has zero reputation coming in and saying, yeah, so this is how you would say this in Nahuatl, and this is this language, and it's actually not Aztec. Aztec isn't the people. Aztec is an empire. The people are specific to the tribe, and so I'm actually would technically in persona would be Mexica or Hualec Mexica. And Spanish, and you have people that are just nodding along and they're like, yeah, sure, that sounds great, and then they walk away because the information's inaccessible to them because it's not something they're familiar with. So it's not even the challenge of finding resources because they exist. It's a challenge of finding them and being able to present them in a palatable way for everyone else. And getting everyone else in the SCA to kind of understand that those resources are valid, acceptable, and truthful. Indigenous resources are going to be better than European resources whenever talking about indigenous people, because those are firsthand accounts, as opposed to filtered through the eyes of European conquistadors who had an agenda. So, it's more challenging getting people to accept those things to accept that this is an authentic resource. It might not be in the language I speak, but it is an authentic resource, and maybe we should reach out to people to talk about the fact that we don't have enough people in the SCA to look and understand these resources.
So thinking about resources and research, how many folks on the panel by hands have been involved with ANS competitions, or just a couple? So have either of you had experiences where ANS judges had difficulty in understanding material that was coming either from an elder in the community or from a resource that is not what is normally considered a normal primary resource in what is a historical document?
So in my case, what I can say happened is that I usually get one of two responses. It's either, oh, I don't know anything about that. Explain to me like I'm 5, which means having to explain, thousands of years of history to somebody in the span of 30 seconds of an intro of a bardic piece in order for it to count as an ANS intro, which is, damn near impossible. And then being criticized for taking too long to explain and not explaining enough. And then the other thing I've had is people tell me that they know more about my own culture than I do. and come in and explain, well, you can't do that because, that's not how we do ANS in the SCA. And those resources don't really work this way, and you can't really present that information in this manner, and that's not good enough documentation for heraldry or what have you. And luckily, I don't get as many of those. I get more of the former, where they're just kind of like, I don't know anything about this. Please explain to me like I'm 5 in 10 seconds. But there are the others, and you get that especially a lot with people who, they take that laurel title way too seriously, and suddenly they think they're an expert on every subject.
I personally avoided it. Like, made like the concerted effort that, like, okay, I entered Queen's Prize. I entered something that specifically couldn't be construed as something else. I had something else entirely I could do, but then it was going to be, how'd you learn how to do that? I'm like, well, I talked to this guy sitting out, in the middle of, June when it was really hot, and he talked to me for a good half hour, and he just happens to be a national treasure. He told me all about it. How do you explain that to, like, this is a person who's considered kind of the heart and soul of part of your culture now? You can't. You can say it, but nobody will understand it. It's not. A lot of things you see, it's not documentation unless it's written down.
So I guess as a person who works in an academic field, and I'll pose this out to everyone who's watching, it's important to remember that oral histories are a valuable resource, and they're used by ethnographers, they're used by anthropologists, they're used by historians. And if a person records an elder from their community sharing something on how to do something, it is a valid form of primary information. Now, the big question comes in, is the person bringing it forward, are they citing that elder appropriately in a way the elder likes? That's not your judge. That's between the elder and that individual who's sharing it with you. But it's important to remember that those are important and valuable resources. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be an elder. There are basket weavers who are much younger than I am, who could teach me way more than I could even perceive about basket weaving, because they've had the opportunity to grow up with it. So sometimes that firsthand experience is far more valuable than something in an academic journal. Thinking about that concept of access to information and the appreciation of just the information, has anyone on the panel experienced situations where they felt that there was a misappropriation of an Indigenous culture in an SCA setting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Would either of you
Same
be
thing,
willing to
probably,
share?
Laurellen. Go for it.
So are you talking about people in an SCA setting wearing clothing that's misappropriated, or are you talking about people who are doing personas that may be misappropriated. Is it just everything, anything? Because there
Yes.
are certain situations, right, where it is clearly appropriation. Not too long ago, at one of the biggest events that my barony runs, this little gal showed up. It was her first event. She was very excited. And she showed up in a Plains Indian war bonnet with a very, very tight bustier, very short shorts, and some really fuzzy boots. And so, yeah, this kind of thing does happen. And because, our culture, this overall dominant culture, has been taught that it can consume indigenous iconography, indigenous imagery, indigenous culture without any understanding. So most of the time it's out of ignorance. They like what it looks like. They've been taught that they can take that and make it their own, which is, the basis of appropriation. It happens quite a bit. I will say, however, that it doesn't happen as much as I think it might in this area. I think it happens in other places more, because I think that, and this is just my experience, the western half of this continent was some of the last parts of the continent to sort of be colonized. And I think there is more of an understanding and more visual of Native Americans on this half of the continent. I think it probably happens a little more elsewhere. But I haven't really traveled that much to the East Coast. But it's always the war bonnet. Somebody always gets an idea that a war bonnet is awesome, and they're super awesome. But they're a religious item, and there is a very specific way to earn them. But it again is this it's become a stereotypical idea of what Indians wear. And so it is the thing that I most often see go by. And sometimes I will stop the person, I'll ask them questions, I'll try not to be confrontational. And most of the time it's just ignorance. But sometimes it's, I like this, I'm going to wear it, and I don't care if it's appropriation, because that's just your opinion. So it can be an uphill climb sometimes. And most often it happens at events that have a lot of very new people or public who want to get into the spirit of things. So, it doesn't often happen at very specific, like crown events, or, very, very specific SCA events. It's mostly newer people in public.
So, thinking about that, and before we segue to Tvoromir, because I really want to hear about your experience as well. In the chat, I noticed that there was a comment of, it's just a costume, or it's never just a costume. And I think, it's important to really point out that certain things are known cultural protocols for people in the United States and in Canada. If a veteran was wearing a Medal of Honor, we would all be aware of what that is in the United States. If a person's wearing an eagle feather, in a lot of ways, it is a lot of the same symbology. In my own community, it's not something that everybody can have. You have to be gifted your own first eagle feather before you can even go and get the permits with some of the older community folks. So it is not an honor that can be grabbed on without staining it. And it is effectively the same as if claiming you had stolen honor. And I think it's really...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please finish.
Oh, for my tribe, it's a huge honor. And every single feather on that bonnet was earned, and it was earned through the people. So, it's very, if you want a cognate, it's kind of like a peerage in some ways. And nobody in the SCA would wear a belt or a chain or a laurel or a pelican, because they know that those things have to be bestowed in a certain way, right? But not everybody knows about how war bonnets are bestowed. So this gets back to a lack of understanding, a lack of research, and it's very often, it's a sexualization of the sacred too that often happens, where a lot of the indigenous iconography indigenous imagery, indigenous culture becomes sexualized. And that is partially because, you know, Halloween costumes have been around forever, and indigenous items are, you know, fodder for that. And so when the public sees this, the non educated public sees this, and they decide, oh well, you know, it's an SCA event, I'm going to dress up. There is no understanding really of what that means. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the things when somebody asks me, what is the difference between appropriation and appreciation? I always ask them, is it sexualized? Is this a trope that's sexualized? Because if it is, it's appropriation. That's a biggie.
Well,
Go
and
ahead.
like intent is
Mhm.
a big thing. I mean, like I've been to an event where the whole intent was, at least from my end, was like very iffy, because it was like literally Norse personas and European personas. The theme of the event was them arguing over who discovered America. I was the only indigenous persona or person there, and I'm like,
Well, so, you
Yeah,
know,
that's cringe.
there's a question actually about what is the difference between appropriation and appreciation. You know, and I guess
that-
this is a really important conversation. Tvormir, obviously you've got a thought. I want to hear it.
So the story I was going to tell, the worst case scene is that same event. That's why I'm like, Laurellen, yeah, you go, you got this one.
Yeah, I think I
People
looked at you
talked
and
me
said,
down and walked me away because I was not in a place where I could have had the conversation Laurellen did.
Yeah,
The
my
stolen
eyes
valor
either.
thing, yeah, is good. Appropriation versus appreciation is also going to be different. Okay, apparently I'm going back there. I have earned 8 eagle feathers in a life of doing a bunch of things. Think about how many eagle feathers are on a war bonnet. I have 8. And that's a fairly large number for most of us. They are medals. It is absolutely stolen valor. You want to wear deerskin? That's the uniform. You want to wear eagle feathers? That's a medal. Okay. So appropriation appreciation is precisely that line about how that community is going to feel it. The kimono industry is delighted when people buy kimono. They want people to buy kimono. That's one community, one culture. I can't speak for them. What I can say is that respect, that bringing of that respectful presence, and perhaps asking before asserting, these are good things. And I know that I wonder about all of that as I go. I'm pretty ginger when I look at things. I decided when I needed to no longer camp in a tent. And the whole thing all over the SCA, make a Vardo, make a Vardo. What do the Romani think of that? And I went and found out what the Romani thought of that. I didn't build a Vardo. Because I went and asked. Does that help?
I think it does. You know, it's a concept of power. And I think when I think about someone dressing up as an indigenous person, if someone was going to, let's say, dress up as a Chinook or an Indian in Oregon and somewhere near my neighborhood, I would probably have a pretty high burden of expectation on them. Are they involved in my community? Do they know who I am? Do they know their connections to the families? You know, how are they related in, right? That goes back to one of those old questions that I always hear every time I go to a new tribe. Hey, who's your people? Right? Because they're trying to figure out who your family names are, figure out if you're cousins, right? Then they know whether or not they can borrow money. Draven. You know, I would really like to know what your perception is on that fine line of appropriation versus appreciation, because it is a line that is not easy to see and it's easy to go over.
I mean,
Oh, and I think some other folks want to jump in too.
ooh.
Please, whoever wants to jump in, don't make me pick. I'll pick on people if they're
Oh,
not jumping in. So.
I can speak forever, so I'm trying to give everyone else space.
Yeah, I'll wait till Draven's done.
He's doing the thinking. Let him do the steeple.
I'm waiting as well too. I actually posted this quite a bit. I'm one of the moderators of unofficial SCA Indigenous, and I posted this, and I still stand behind it because we ran into this right away from the beginning. So this is like, we've been, I think it's on Facebook, but it was probably around 2018, 2019 when we posted that, and I posted a lengthy kind of thing on it, and the gist of it was that it wasn't a check mark. If you were gonna look into if you weren't from that nation and you were, it doesn't even matter if you're Indigenous. I know, how connected are you to your people? If you're not Indigenous, then it's not a check mark on let's bug every elder or person until we get a yes. And I think that's, I see that from time to time where, like, I talked to two elders and one told me no and the other one said yes, so I'm going with the one that said yes. It's about as childish as going to one parent and then one saying no and then going to the one that said yes. And there's got to be some maturity to it for sure. And this is, for us, it's not a game, especially if we're Indigenous as well too. So I had high expectations, as I imagine some of our panel members here as well too. And really what my expectations were that you would go to the community and you would ask the knowledge keepers, which were the elders, and you'd say, if I'm portraying this, is this something you agree with? Is this something that would either bring honor to you or that you would support? And if they wouldn't, then that's it. Stop. That's it. You're done. And those were really kind of the expectations on that as well too, because our culture is not make believe. This is not something. We're not dead. We're not conquered. We're still here. And we may not be as front and center in terms of media, and certainly in I guess mainstream. And that's getting better for sure in terms of representation, but I think we still got a long way to go on that. But those expectations were there, is that it is a slippery slope, and there's a lot of things that are really sacred to us, and really it's just step with care on that as well too, just as I would as well too if I'm going into an area, if I'm going across seas and such, and I want to make sure I'm not offending, if I'm in Ireland, Irish and such, and I would go to people that were the knowledge keepers of the Irish people as well too, and I would step carefully in those areas as well too. So, thank you.
Who wants to go next?
I could.
Go ahead. You have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good to keep in mind too that, like, tribes all across North America and South America and whatnot, I mean, we're all so different as well. So I wanted to expand on, like, Laurellen's story there, because not every war bonnet is covered in feathers. Not every piece of regalia or sacred objects or whatnot are going to be the same from tribe to tribe to tribe. So it's going to be difficult if you're doing a persona from an active culture that you could possibly be living around next door, even, that something might not be up to par or standard to those people, right? I'm a big advocate of if you want to do an Indigenous persona, then I think you should. To me anyway, it doesn't bother me, but I think the bar is set so much higher for those who aren't Indigenous that you have to tread so lightly that you should be doing your research. It would be no different than if I was to do another persona from, we'll use Europe, the most common, right? I'm going to go to people in the SCA who know more about those personas. I don't see why this would be treated any differently. in when it comes to learning what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing, what you can wear and what you shouldn't wear. You know, those things. We had to get permission to wear some of the stuff that we wear. You know, we have to do real life things to wear some of the things that we wear. I mean, I'm going to a Sundance this spring that will allow me to wear face paint, you know, and will allow me to paint my horse when I take him to events, right? I can't do any of that stuff without doing those things. So because we have to participate and we want to, like, because we do have to do those things in order to earn the right to wear the stuff that we wear or to do the things that we do. I mean, I can understand to the outside person or even the new, I'll use the new person to the SCA, you know, that comes in and sees it and goes, oh, hey, that's amazing. You know, I want to try to do that too. Yeah, I think a lot of it's just, you have to be a lot more careful, right? So yeah, that's what I have to say on it.
Excellent. You know, somebody was mentioning about the vast variety of tribes. And to give an example of this, in the United States, there are 567 federally recognized tribes, and it's estimated that there is the same number of non-federally recognized tribes that are currently petitioning for recognition.
And
So,
literally one of those is the tribe Chief Seattle led.
the Duwamish people, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so the Duwamish people is a good example of one. The Chinook at the mouth of the Columbia River, who signed treaties. Another good example of a community who didn't get federal recognition, yet even got paid out through the Indian Claims Commission because they lost land that was stolen by the U.S. government, coincidentally. So you know, these kinds of things, there is too many tribes to make really gross generalizations. Unfortunately, anthropologists and archaeologists, and I can say this being one, do tend to do that. We lump and split people based on their material culture because it's easy to make generalizations, right? We know that certain folks, if they're utilizing large game, have certain types of material culture and technology that is geared towards that activity, where somebody who's a fishing culture is going to have a completely different way of doing things. And so that's why archaeology and stuff makes these lumps that then become these larger groups that people see a lot of times. It also can be because of their linguistic connections that make these connections that may or may not really have true meaningful connections. A good example of this is a couple of different languages in Penutian. I just mentioned earlier when I was talking, I introduced myself in Chinook. To say the same thing and say good morning, boys and girls in Chinook, I would say Thushchi son danas karamai. Like, good morning, children, how are you doing? But if I say the same thing in Ikishkin, a similar language from the same group, but across the river, same language family, across the river from each other, sound completely different. So even when you get to tribes, like I always tell people, there's at least 2 ways to do everything at every tribe. So expect there to be discrepancy, but ultimately it's the elder's choice on what happens. And sometimes, you know, Edward was mentioning some of the ceremonies he's participating in and how they're creating effective change for his life. When it comes on to responsibility, it's always interesting to see that dichotomy between indigenous culture's concept of responsibility and freedom versus the dominant culture. Tvormir, do you have any thoughts on that?
I was going to say that we have some tribes that ended up clunked in different zones across 2 nations. You say I'm Cree, that doesn't tell me very much. That could be dozens. And so there are many situations like that, and I cannot speak to the drift that happens there, but it's interesting that people know I'm Eastern Cherokee because of verbal differences my band and Moon's band have.
There are some really great questions coming in if folks are watching. And I'm sorry, Tvormir, I don't want to segue off of you too hard.
Just
Oh,
that.
no, but there's very much not a native generic. It's
There isn't, and there isn't a right way to do it. You know, somebody was saying that they have their spouse is Salagi Cherokee, and they want to pursue having a persona in that. And again, you know, like Edward and other folks were saying, talk to the elders from that community and make sure that you're doing it appropriately. Even if you're a descendant from that community, if you didn't grow up in it, you need to learn a little bit in order to get that exposure to be able to carry that weight, right? Because you're not representing yourself, you're representing an entire community. Ultimately, that's what ends up happening in Indigenous communities, and that responsibility is pretty heavy.
And those of
I
us
know,
who end up,
go ahead, DeFormir.
so those of us who end up, like, I'm a city Injun, I'm actually a base Injun. I grew up on military bases and then cities. And so I had only a few Tsalagi around. I had all kinds of Plains people around. And we have a subculture or a pan-Indianness that has come from the Powwow Highway. And so I got political in college and I grew a braid. Now, also, it was a way for me to wear a man's hairstyle that the white people around me could accept as a female hairstyle since I had these things on my chest. But I embraced a lot of pan-Indian stuff that have nothing to do with Tsalagi whatsoever. And so many ways we are trying to find our own ways home from the lumping together that we have participated in or allowed or exaggerated. So back to going to old sources.
I mean,
Can I elaborate on some of the questions that are coming in?
Please do, because they're coming in quick and it's hard to keep
Yeah,
up.
I'm just seeing them and they kind of relate to each other and whatnot. Okay, so I know for us, the biggest example that, like, obviously we did our personas like this and we're very much in your face. So like when you get to an event, okay, I haven't been to an event yet where my soft kit has been changed. She has though, and it's very, very much, you know, in people's faces at an event. When you're researching any of your friends or any of your relatives or anything, if you're researching stuff, the way we did it was we went straight to elders and we went straight to cultural, not even just elders, but people who keep cultural information, because you don't have to be an elder to keep cultural information. Usually what happens is if you can find somebody, they'll tell you who to talk to here, here, and here, and then you have to build relationships to go and talk to them. It's not as simple as being like, hey, I want to go and visit with an elder and learn how to do thus. You're never going to learn anything that way. You're going to have to go there. You're going to have to spend time with them. You're going to have to pay protocol, and it's not always cheap. I'm telling you that right now. Like it's not
Lots of coffee and tobacco.
It can be anything from hide to you know, and they don't ever tell you. It's typically, sometimes it's whatever they ask for. Sometimes it can be whatever you want to give, but there's a minimum usually, and you're building relationships with these elders and these people. We went personally. I have a friend who I tattoo. We went to his dad is the chief of the Samson Cree Nation here in Alberta. We met with him, and from there it just kind of spidered out into people we can get a hold of. When you're filtering information, it can be tricky. It can be tricky to say, I got this part from an elder, but I'm not too sure how it works, because the culture has changed. Cultures have changed over the years. As an example, ribbon shirts. Okay, ribbon shirts aren't obviously traditional. Well, they're traditional, but they're not right for where we play in the SCA, obviously. But the art form of them came from somewhere. So right now they're ribbon, but previously maybe they weren't ribbon. Like they weren't ribbon. You know, maybe they were made from something else, but the same sort of idea, right? So anything that you can get from your elders or whatnot, and even museums or anywhere, is always a start, and take some of it with a grain of salt, because every elder might tell you something different, right? It could be different from 30 miles down to the next reservation. You don't know like what you're going to get all the time.
Well,
Countess. You are waving your hand frantically.
Well, I saw a question go by in the chat about doing indigenous items for ANS. And I kind of wanted to address that because that's something that I'm interested in doing. And this actually segues into thinking about first contact and thinking about like ribbon shirts. Ribbon shirts came from somewhere, as you said, right? But right now they look like ribbon shirts. And so one of the things that I have been planning on doing is an indigenous ANS item. And I've landed on beads, which are ubiquitous indigenous art form. But we're part of the first contact, right? And so trying to find out what was used previously and if I can fit it into the SCA time frame. And time is very difficult because time, for most indigenous people is not a linear construct. So, in thinking about what I want to do for an ANS project, and this is just advice if you are interested in that, your question went by, and so I can't see who did it, who asked it. So when I say you, whomever asked that question, I think that considering how you would want to, what time period that you want to do, and then considering how you want to approach it. For me, the research looked a lot like going and looking at where the beads would come from that were used for trade and that were used for beading, and where in Europe they would come from, and what they would look like, what was their size. And you can find a lot of that information pretty easily. There's a lot out there. You don't have to ask tribes for that. There is also tribes who maintain pattern books. Now, some of those patterns can only be passed down through different families, so you have to be very careful about that. But that knowledge is actually pretty easy to come by. So as I think about putting this beading thing together, and I think about how beads changed the way that Native Americans did stuff, and how I think about what things looked like before beads, and what European beadwork looked like, this is how I'm approaching doing an ANS project with an indigenous item. I'm doing a lot of broad research, and then I'm going to go ahead and figure out what narrow bit I want to do. This doesn't always work for everything, obviously, because sometimes in the archaeological record things don't survive, or they get mishandled, or they get lost. So when you think about doing an indigenous project, as I'm doing, I think it just comes back to research. And there's a lot of places that have a lot of, this is a sad thing, actually, but it works in a way that is helpful. During first contact, a lot of indigenous items were shipped back to Europe. So a lot of these museums have these pieces that are either pre-contact or just at first contact. And there's a lot of museums in Germany that have realized the value of some of this stuff, and they are starting to open up their collections. So there are places that you can go on the internet right now to see things, to see things pre-contact, which is huge, especially for someone like me who really gets into that kind of detail for ANS. So I don't know if that answered your question. If you pop up again and ask the question again, I will try and answer more or better in the chat. But for me, that's how I approach, or will be approaching, an ANS piece. I haven't decided if I want to do a piece of beadwork or if I want to do something with leather, but I do plan on doing that because I think that it is necessary for us to retool the way that we look at ANS when it comes to indigenous pieces. And I want to have some knowledge and some experience going through the system with an indigenous piece so that I can kind of figure out where we can retool it. Because that's, as more indigenous personas come in, that's really important because our ANS is very grounded in a Eurocentric model.
So I've got a really interesting question, Countess. It segues off of that. In thinking about the continuity of cultural information and the transfer of it. I know when I worked at the culture department for my community, we'd say reach out to 100 kids. If we can snag one, it was a successful year. And if ANS and SCA created the ability for indigenous items and personas to be more fully enacted, do you guys think it would create a space for kids to feel like their culture is acceptable and to bring it out into the open at events?
I can
Yes.
directly speak to that because I will tell you that as I said before, I got a lot of resistance to trying to do an indigenous Mexica, even just partially, not even 100% indigenous, but trying to do anything indigenous as far as Latin American goes. I got a lot of resistance against that, and I pushed back against it, and I did it because I'm a stubborn person, and I'm like, oh, I can't do this? Fine, I'm going to do this. And I won our Kingdom Bardic competition the first time I entered it, specifically doing most of my material in indigenous languages, just to kind of tell people off about that, because that's how stubborn of a person I am. And after I did that, I had several people approach me, tell me, oh, when I first started 5 or 10 years ago, I wanted to have like an indigenous Maya persona because, you know, I wanted to explore that part of my heritage, or my family's from Cuba, and I wanted to do an indigenous persona based off of that, but everyone pushed me away. So a big part of it is not just the visibility and the work that those of us who are doing these kind of things, being front and center in the various peerages and events, but is also really reteaching people how to talk about non-European personas. And that's a big problem, not even just indigenous. I mean, talk to the Middle Eastern crowd and they'll tell you about the challenges, or even the Asian crowd is another. Asian personas, Asian SCA players have a lot of opinions about that too. There's a big issue in that even though we have been veering away from this Eurocentrism for a while, everyone has been talking about it. It just wasn't in writing. Now it is officially in writing, and you still see people that are like pushing against that writing because it's not their SCA anymore.
Vormir, there is a very specific question about the use of feathers and folks that are involved with the blue feather group. And I, given that you are in a unique setting with us, I really love to know your perception on this.
So
Well,
right
their
below
question
all our
specifically
relations
is,
are the blue feather on the banner.
could they wear it? No.
Well-
Would it be an appropriation if folks that were part of that group wore it openly as part of their garb? And if so, what would be an appropriate way to wear
Y'all, Golden Eagle doesn't have blue feathers.
it?
We're not trying to say don't wear feathers. Come on now. You know the Scots chieftain with the little three. No. We're saying an eagle feather, a golden eagle feather, is a thing with reverb on. Okay. But different cultures do different things. I told you I'd been awarded 8 of them. You know what? As Tsalagi, I don't wear them. I have the right from my left arm band to wear a hawk feather and, wait for it, a turkey feather. It's got meaning in my culture and it's got some respect in my culture, but y'all, it's turkey. So different cultures
birds have different symbols.
Right. So I don't tend to wear my turkey feather at powwows out here because yeah, but please don't think we're saying don't wear any feather. No. Just respect the golden eagle.
And I would caution to not wear anything that looks like a war bonnet or any kind of indigenous bonnet or headdress, even if it has blue feathers, just because some of us get sensitive.
Well, and that's also back into that, native generic. Not all of us wore those bonnets.
Right.
For like,
No, and there's a bunch of different varieties, and the ways to earn them vary between communities. Some
it's
people, I know some tribes, it's actually having been in a conflict and lived through it and been an actual warrior. I know for some, it's about deeds, meritorious deeds. You know, I know one guy who, almost afraid to say this, but he lost his son in a drowning accident, and he had to save another one of his kids, and he had to choose between the two of them. And he was gifted a feather by the folks in the community because of the loss and the fact that he had to make an unreasonable choice.
Well, and it's like with Miranai, you know, Sloggy, it's a small roach, maybe with some feathers out the back, maybe on the band, or nothing at all, you know. Whereas, you know, you see, you know, Edward, he's got a little thing. It's totally different. But it's, I think that one of the things we kind of miss out on is, you know, they tell us everybody's SCA journey is different. You know, they're here for different reasons. They're doing different things. You know, Calontir has cherished the goob, you know, as a thing, but, you know, I think we get held to a different standard. It's like, you know, I'm in Calontir. It is an Anglo-Saxon kingdom. And you know, I'm sure if I said, you know, Saxons and Normans are all the same, everybody
I know
be
a couple of
up in
folks that'd be
arms.
fighting words.
Right. There'd be a whole war at Penzic just over that. But, you know, for us, it's, you know, we're lumped into this generic thing of, oh, well, we wore buckskins and we're war bonnets, and, you know, but there's 565 times 2 potentially different of us that are all different, and nobody seems to, I don't think it registers because we're a blip in the history book. We're a blip here, and, you know, it's like, you know, we talk about ANS. How are we going to do ANS? I'm doing stuff that is potentially, you know, close to 1,000 years different than from what Edward does, or, you know, whereas you do more the north side of things. I do that. Here's the other side of the family coming and seeing it. You know, where do we fall in that ANS? You know, you know, for me, it's accents and affectations because I'm going somewhere. I'm not necessarily going to dress like myself and stand out because I want to blend in and move on and see what there is to see. But I'm going to put my little hints to it. You know, I'll have my little things that are important, but that may not be in the full. I'm not in regalia. I'm not, you know, I'm out there doing ceremony. I'm wearing my clothes. You know, when I love your guys' stuff, but when you showed up and they started taking pictures of you, I was like, I'm done. I can't do nothing now. Because I even got, you know, like, well, hey, did you, you know, I swear, I looked at the timestamps. It was like within 3 minutes of posting your picture in that tournament. People are like, did you see this guy? Just raw. And I'm just like, oh, man.
Hey, it's okay for us to inspire each other. I mean, Edward,
Yeah.
you're inspiring
Yeah, but
me. I'm making a set of armor based on my own community's armor. And I wouldn't have ever thought of trying it had I not seen what you were doing on the field.
Right. But like for me, I saw that and like I got, you know, people go, well, why can't you do something like that? And I'm like,
Yeah, see, I think
it.
that's a little unfair for people to say to you, to have this expectation all of a sudden on you for being, you know, native out of nowhere, you know, after having such bad interactions over your SCA career with, like, you know, you stepped into it and then all of a sudden, you know, you got a bunch of backlash, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, hey, why didn't you do that? That's a huge terrible expectation for somebody to have on you. I want to say that, and to be clear, we use imitation eagle feathers for our persona kits. We don't use the real ones, specifically because real ones have far more meaning for us than to just put into our garb and then go to an SCA event and it possibly get messed up. There are specific protocols for us. If you drop eagle feathers, they even touch the ground. So we use imitation ones on purpose. And then to to elaborate on the ANS stuff, I'd like to read something that a Laurel from my kingdom sent me that gave me inspiration to do ANS stuff, because I didn't know how to, I honestly didn't know where to go with all my ANS stuff. I'm making a war shirt right now, and you know, it's been difficult to figure out where I'm gonna put my information and how to submit it during tournaments and stuff when we finally get to go back to, you know, our game and stuff. So and I'd like to think that a lot of the Laurels in this kingdom specifically think this way. I haven't met any of the Laurels here that, because typically it's the Laurels doing the judging on most competitions and whatnot for ANS. So so she says, a branch of ethnography called ethnoarchaeology attempts to reconstruct historic life ways by studying material and non-material traditions of modern societies. It also attempts to understand how historic objects were made through inference using the same techniques as the modern counterparts, given a similar set of tools and materials. This application of ethnoarchaeology is widely and broadly used in the SCA. We recreate a myriad of historic societies based on the pieces left behind. Those pieces can be material goods, structures, art, documents, and stories. But the art, documents, and stories we use do not need to be written down. Oral histories and traditions are widely accepted forms of documentation in ethnoarchaeology, used to inform researchers about historical cultures and societies. As a historical recreation group, those cultural traditions and stories should not be discounted as valid documentation in the SCA. When we talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary sources, we are assessing the levels of distance the source is from the original. Relating to First Nations oral history, traditions, these are lessons, myths, and teachings passed down through generations. The keepers of those traditions take great pride in maintaining the teachings intact. The same stories and teachings are being told today as they were 500 plus years ago. An SCA artisan using these teachings as documentation in an arts and science entry should feel comfortable oral traditions as primary or secondary sources, depending only on who they've received the oral history from, not from a misguided sense of, quote, what qualifies as documentation, end quote. The burden is on the adjudicators of ANS entries to understand and respect the entrance source materials, not the entrance to educate their judges on lesser known branches of archaeology. Mr. Sadelhide, Order of the Laurel.
So just to segue off that, I will pose this challenge to everyone who's watching this. If you need to, find me. I'm a qualified archaeologist. I will be more than happy to help you with understanding how the documentation works, discussing how ethnoarchaeology works, discussing experimental archaeology, and helping navigate the process so more of these things can be assessed properly. Just reach out, please. I know we're getting close to running out of time, and I want to make sure that everyone gets to talk about all of the subjects that we wanted to. And Countess, I know you had your hand up earlier. Is there something that you wanted to bring up?
Oh, well, we've passed on this point, but I just want to reiterate that when people struggle with thinking of indigenous peoples as a monolith, this is a clear indication of colonization and stereotyping. And so when you start thinking that way, that is a colonial way of thinking. And that is when you can tell yourself to not do that, because it's very difficult to excise colonization from our experience. We are children of colonization, every single one of us, whether you're indigenous or not. So, so it takes a lot of sort of questioning everything in order to get past that. Any assumption should be questioned. We get back to the war bonnets. All Indians wore war bonnets. It's becoming a ubiquitous item, but not all indigenous peoples did wear those, or if they did, they were different. It gets back to the idea that for every single tribe, there is a different culture. And decolonizing ourselves is the work of a lifetime. You know, and that's I think when we consider how to fit Indigenous people and items and personas into the SCA, there's going to have to be a lot of decolonization to make it a comfortable fit. So, you know, starting with understanding that Indigenous people are not a monolith is a really great place.
And personally, I like to add to that that a lot of that decolonization work is very personal. It's a lot of internal work you got to do that kind of stuff. I mean, I myself, I can't identify as a specific Indigenous culture because of the very extensive colonization that happened in Latin America, where, you know, just about everyone is part Indigenous, but exactly what percentage what, and do we even identify by percentage or by geography or by family ties or what have you? I mean, it's so hard. You know, I feel really, I feel really excited and fortunate to hear people that can talk about their specific identity. That's not something I can do. I mean, I can tell you that I have family from these very, very heavily Indigenous parts of Mexico, but I can't tell you specifically what they are tribe-wise or what culture they come from. And so that work as far as decolonizing, it's hard. It's a hard job, and it's a thankless job. You're not going to get a lot of brownie points or any awards for it, unfortunately. But it's also really rewarding to kind of figure out where you come from and to find out how to share it with other people. That's the thing that I've learned the most from this experience is not feeling alone in not knowing exactly everything about my own history, but also kind of finding that unity in other people that are also doing that work together and working with a community that is trying to do this work together.
Boromir.
And it is so Ga-ga-gew said that decolonizing is huge and exhausting and never ending, and I totally agree. And it's okay to take a break. It's okay to take a minute. And I realized something going on. We were talking about how we joined the SCA. Part of what I've done in the SCA is it's my European powwow highway. It's a way to learn and have space for some of that side of me too.
I don't think I've ever heard that analogy before. It's my
well, it
powwow
totally
highway
just
to the-
hit me. So I won't promise I made it, but I know it just hit me. And so
that is a fantastic analogy.
So part of being mixed is you have some internalized stuff and you can go to war with yourself. And I had a really bad time when I was in my early 20s when we're all getting all uppity and warlike and stuff. And the cure for me deciding that catching myself being ethnocentric for Cherokee stuff was that I moved to Ballard, which is a Scandinavian fisherman neighborhood where almost all of the old people are legit elders and I can respect them, and getting more active in the SCA. So I could give myself both pieces and teach myself to respect both pieces, if that makes sense. It was a piece of my healing. So Moonhide Sasan, you wear what you want.
Well, I would caution on that though, because if I went to do my own tribe in the SCA, we didn't wear nothing during the summer, and so that would get really uncomfortable for folks.
Okay, legal
for everybody else.
That's the thing. If I was going to wear traditional Cherokee hair, I'd be like bald back to back. You know, yay! You wear your roach. Your roach is your own personal hair in the back of your head, y'all. No. Anyway, well, I just wanted to say make space for you.
I know that we're already over time, and I know that people are starting to drop off because they're getting tired and stuff. So I do want to give an opportunity for everyone to say some parting thoughts, but I do want to pose a challenge to everyone that's listened in or is going to listen in when this recording ends up getting posted. And I would posit to you that you need to find an opportunity to find a new person in the SCA, like we always tell each other, when we all get to go back at this, and to make sure that if you're camping next to somebody you don't know, make friends with them, make them comfortable. Remember, we're all there to have a great time, and we're all there to learn together. And with that, we'll go around the line and let everyone have their parting thoughts. Moon?
I don't know. I guess for me, my thing's always been be that person you needed when you started. You know, because you don't know where that person's at as long as you're kind of doing your best to be helpful. But lately, I've heard, you know, a lot, especially in relation to a lot of other things, that people saying, "I see you," you know, "I hear you." Like, that's nice. Do better. Don't worry about just telling me you see me. Do better. That's all I want. You don't have to make it known. Just be better. And if you're being that person you needed, yeah, you're being better.
Draven?
Yeah, a lot to say on this one here. I think I chased becoming a member of the Order of the White Scarf for about, it took me a decade. And I think in retrospect as well too, it was interesting. I've said this comment, and actually I think it pissed off someone who's non-Indigenous because they took offense to it there when I was talking and they overheard. But here's the thing, like, here's probably one of the most controversial thoughts I'll leave. If you want to succeed in the SCA, in some ways you have to leave your Indigenous values and such. And I found this personally from a fighting perspective. I had to leave those kind of at the door or cool them in a sense to move forward, to succeed and such. And it's just something to consider. I haven't had these discussions with a lot of the Indigenous players here, and certainly I'd like to continue those. So I invite you to reach out to me on that. But I'll never be a Pelican, and the reason why is according to my beliefs of my people and Woodlands Cree, you don't do that. You don't, like, it's the way the SCA sets it up. You don't do that. In fact, it's really frowned upon, like, to be boastful on service. Like, you're a human being. You should do it. You know, you see something that needs to be done, you do it. You don't ask for praise or anything like that. And so I've avoided a lot of that. And those are just some thoughts as well too, because I haven't seen enough in terms of Indigenous players where we've had some discussions really about that. But I remember making this effort and was like, okay, these are what's holding me back according to what I guess my peers are telling me I got to work on. And then I realized those are my Indigenous values. People are like, oh, you're arrogant. And it's like, well, here's where I'm coming from. I'm Woodlands Cree. We conquered a lot of territory. We're very aggressive. It's in my nature. It's not like we're going to shy down. In fact, I've been told that I'm a pretty aggressive individual when I'm fighting. I mean, I don't hurt people, but that's to my core and who I am. So fighting has actually been a great outlet for that. But it's also held me back on some ways as well too. And the only people that really supported me on that journey were really the people that I, like, my mentors in that sense, who I had formal relationships with and such. And I want to point that out as well too, that it, like, I struggle with it. So I took a little bit of a hiatus for about 4 years. I came back. Now I don't give a crap. I go out there. I have fun. I think people see the real me, and I don't hold back my Indigenous. And I really don't care now about really let the chips fall where they may. And I'm going to be me. I'm going to go out there and do things on my own terms. I will do an Indigenous persona because I think I'm ready for that. And it's not because of any outward pressure or anything like that. It's because I'm doing it on my own terms. Like, I had short hair. I'm growing braids. Like, it's because I want to. It's no pressure.
Saw
It's
that.
all me on that. So those are some personal choices, and I just wanted to let people know that, because I think I'm certain there's maybe others as well too, where the SCA culture kind of stifles that unintentionally, but maybe intentionally. So thank you. Thank you much.
Kavormir.
I kind of had my closing preachy. Ski, thank you very much.
Teuctli.
Two things, pretty short but connected to each other. Someone is always watching you. Whether you think so or not, someone is always watching you. And that is both good and bad. It can be bad because they can see the bad that you do, or the bad that you carry, or the things that you do that you think you might be able to get away with. But it could be good because sometimes people need to see someone else like them. And that's the second thing I would say, is that you're not alone. You may think you're alone. You may feel alone. You may feel like you're the only person doing something sometimes. But I guarantee you, you're not. You just haven't found the other person who is struggling yet. And that's probably where I'll leave that for now before I get too emotional about that.
Edward and Ga-ga-gew.
Fun, hey. Well, we're glad to see that. I'm going to make this part of my comments. I'm glad to see that Draven's growing his hair. All right. Wah, buddy. Yeah. Yeah, I guess in closing, I'm going to say that I personally think that if you're Indigenous and you want to do your culture, then yeah, I'm going to say don't let anybody tell you you can't. I feel like me and Ga-ga-gew are kind of blessed with where we're from. We're in a pretty progressive kingdom, so and we're in positions right now that allow us to promote such a beautiful culture and beautiful cultures. I just want to say thanks to those who have even said that we've been inspirations to them. You don't know what that means to us. And we hope we can just continue to keep doing that for others. So yeah, that's probably what we got to say. You anything? No? Yeah, that's it. Well, thanks.
Countess.
Laurellen, he
Countess.
froze.
Oh, she jumped off.
Oh,
Well, those of us who've been on the panel have put marks on our backs. So those of you who are out there, if you get an opportunity and you don't know who else to ask, come and ask us, because we were dumb enough to stick our hands up in the class. Having said that, please, you've seen that folks have had wonderful, beautiful experiences, and they've also had some trying times. I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that we have more happy times and less trying ones. And with that, I want to say thank you, everyone. It's been an absolutely fantastic evening.
This has been amazing. Heichka to all our panelists. You've given us so much to think about, and it's so sad to hear about some of your hardships, and thank you for sharing those and your joys as well. And I want the SCA to be a place where we can all explore our ancestry and celebrate it. And I see many of you taking the punches to be those for the people that come after you. And I really admire all of you. And I don't want my game, I want you in my game. And I don't know. I'm just so glad you guys could join us today. I'm so happy that you were here with us.
I was just excited I got to put on garb for the first time in a long time.
Hi.
It's bizarrely warm here, so I'm kind of roaming at the moment. So
So usually at the end, we either have our people welcome to stay. We usually kind of go into sort of a very informal social gathering, just sort of a check-in with everybody. And panelists or speakers are welcome to stay or sign off. I know some of you it's a little later than for some of us here on the West Coast. Yeah, so it's just more sort of unstructured. I don't know if there's any panelists are interested, be willing to take on more questions if there's more questions or.
I will, but I'm going to take a break for just a moment because I've been sitting here a little while.
And you've been amazing. Thank you so much.
I'll be right back.
I'll be staying as well.
yeah,
So
I'll hang out. But I know, like me and Mir probably say, like for Zoe is like Wado, which is thank you for like putting all this together.
Thank you.
Well, ski for me because Eastern Band.
Well, it's because you talk funny.
Yeah, who's got the home?
are we
Oh,
still recording?
Oh,
We are still recording, and I will
I
be
am
turning off the
that's an
recording
excellent
now.
point. I am, yeah,